Hello and welcome to Tap Into the Truth. This is your host, Tim Tapp, and today we are broadcasting once again from the ever-so-lovely Roane County, Tennessee. As I sit here, wearing my Heritage Foundation ball cap and making my final bit of on-air notes with my Hillsdale College pen, I look down at it and understand that, just like printed clearly on the pen, pursuing truth and defending liberty isn't just the responsibility of a select few. It's the responsibility of everyone in this country. Way too many of us just don't take it seriously. With that in mind, let's go ahead and get started with a few of the news tidbits of the day. First of all, the 113th Congress got started today, and surprise, surprise, John Boehner is reelected as Speaker of the House. Despite all the threats and anger over the last few days, the division within the Republican Party, he still manages to hold on to that position of authority and power, and I guess Eric Cantor will just have to wait at least one more term before he gets his chance. Also in the news, if you'll recall, just a few days before the new year began, one of the lists we went over was companies and brands that were predicted to disappear in the upcoming year. On that list, mentioned prominently, was Al Gore's television network, Current TV. Well, I don't know, as I've not been able to read through all of the information on the deal just yet, if the name Current TV is going to stay. But word came out yesterday, officially announced today, Mr. Al Gore has officially sold Current TV to the Al Jazeera network. In the press release, Al Gore said that Al Jazeera, like Current, believes that facts and truths lead to better understanding of the world around us. Well, I guess that means nothing much is really going to change. It's still going to be the same anti-American outfit it's always been. On the subtopic of Boehner, as you'll recall, current Speaker Boehner took a lot of heat over the last couple of days over the Hurricane Sandy relief vote that he tabled shortly after the so-called fiscal cliff deal had been passed. Well, turned out maybe instead of promising to go ahead and take that up first thing, that they should have spent some more time looking at this thing, because now we're finding things that are in the Senate's bill that they're expected to vote and pass. And ladies and gentlemen, flat out, this doesn't amount to anything less than exploiting disaster victims. It's completely inexcusable. If you are angry about the vote being tabled, you should be even more angry and have that anger focused straight on the Obama administration, who pushed for these additional items in this bill. And I'm going to go over a very short list and some of the more questionable ones, starting out with the fact that this bill includes not just a little bit of money, but $100 million for funding for Head Start. Now, there's no question that there may very well be several Head Start centers that need repairs from the hurricane damage, but $100 million? Anytime you have an expenditure of that size, you ought to take a little bit of a closer look at it. A few other questionable items in the package that the media has been covering. There's money for fisheries in Alaska. There's free money for the Secretary of Health and Human Services. No apparent reason, just here you go, do whatever you want to with it. Repairs to the Smithsonian. And there's even a $17 billion inclusion for community development block grant funds. For the rest of us, ladies and gentlemen, that's just simply known as a slush fund. There's even stuff in here that the libs hate, including gifts for certain Wall Street banks, and even for NASCAR. Not real sure what NASCAR has to do with Hurricane Sandy relief efforts, but at any rate, Matt Mayer, a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, was quoted as saying that this, quote, reflects the president's cavalier attitude towards spending and deficits. He intends to exploit loopholes in the Budget Control Act that will allow this new spending above the existing spending limits without offsets. In an era of chronic trillion-dollar deficits, this is an act of willful fiscal negligence. He went on to say that the priority should be on Sandy's real victims, and that all requested funds for federal departments and agencies that does not flow to the states, localities, businesses, or citizens for response and recovery activities should not be included in this supplemental request. I think most people would agree, especially the victims of the hurricane. Hurricane Sandy is the type of disaster that FEMA should be addressing anyway, not all these other additional agencies. Federal assistance is needed by the standards set forth under the current federal guidelines. But the Obama administration's exploitation of this hurricane victims for billions in additional governmental spending deserves an extremely angry response by not only those affected by the storm, but by every single tax-paying American. Because for crying out loud, this is one of the most egregious acts that I have seen yet from our government. And you can't even hardly hold the Senate or the House accountable for this. Because, again, just like with our wonderful little fiscal cliff deal, the Senate had very little time to go over and look at this. We've got to return to a time when the Senate or the House actually writes their own legislation and it goes through committee and everybody gets to read it before they vote on it, instead of, okay, somebody gets outsourced to do the job of writing the legislation and then they present it just a few minutes before time to vote. Because this kind of thing continues to happen. They talk about making laws is like making sausage, and you just shouldn't look at it. Well, of course they don't want you to look at it, ladies and gentlemen. Why would they want you to know every which way they're using to rip you off as a taxpayer? Other things they don't want you to know. Did you know that, once again, the National Defense Authorization Act has been renewed? Even though the occupier of the White House not only threatened but guaranteed to veto this particular law, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2013, a renewal of the same law from the previous year. He threatened to veto it over prohibitions on closing Gitmo. Not over any of the other issues, strangely enough. The various civil liberty advocates have roundly criticized the bill over Guantanamo Bay, and a separate section that could, and I suggest will, allow the military to indefinitely detain American citizens on the suspicion of supporting terrorism. Just as he did with last year's version of the bill, Obama decided that the need to pass the NDAA, which also sets the Armed Forces' $633 billion budget for the 2013 fiscal year, was simply too great to ignore. According to the presidential signing statement released early morning hours of Thursday, members of the House Human Rights Coalition have argued Obama to follow through on this veto threat, blasting his decision as a cave to congressional Republicans. I can see where they might think that. But let's finish this part of the story and then we'll get a little bit back into the topic. Quote, President Obama has utterly failed the first test of his second term, even before Inauguration Day. That was a quote from the director of the American Civil Liberties Union. Anthony Romero said in this little statement that, quote, his signature means indefinite detention without charge or trial, as well as the illegal military commissions will be extended. It's the second time that the president has promised to veto a piece of very controversial national security legislation, only to sign it. According to the executive director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, quote, he has a habit of promising resistance to national security initiatives that he ultimately ends up supporting and enabling. Now, at least the ACLU is focused somewhat on the fact that this bill does in fact allow indefinite detainment without trial, without representation, without anything other than the assertion that you as an American citizen are somehow engaged or enabling or inciting acts of terrorism. It's extremely vague on what constitutes the act of terrorism. In fact, I would go so far as to venture that there's a plethora of news talk radio hosts that very well could fall under that definition while the current administration remains in power. Obama's threat to veto was based solely on the fact that he doesn't want restrictions on Gitmo. Once again, this man shows he has more concern about the feelings of these people who have been captured on the battlefield, killing and attacking Americans as well as civilians in their home countries. These people are the enemy of all free peoples. But he's more concerned about them and how they feel. That's what brought forth the threat of veto. But make no mistake about it, he goes ahead and signs this not because he's that concerned about Gitmo. Certainly not for any other reason except for the fact that he likes the idea that once he crowns himself as ultimate emperor, which he believes himself already to be, but he's just not made the public aware of it yet, that he'll have the legal authority allowed by all three branches of our government to detain American citizens without actually ever having to charge them. I mean, it's no different than being a political prisoner in the days of apartheid in South Africa or right now in communist China. If you upset the apple cart, they're going to put you away. Don't believe me? Well, listen to this next story. The targeted killing program that the Obama administration has been utilizing through their use of drones since they've taken over the man calls disaster contingency operations, better known as the War on Terror, has had its day in court, or at least the fact that they'll be able to keep secret its legal justification for killing without a trial of an American suspected of joining Al-Qaeda after a federal judge on Wednesday dismissed